The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when a phone call shattered the tranquility of the Henderson household. Nestled in the heart of the sleepy town of Willow Creek, the home was a picture of suburban bliss, surrounded by tall oak trees and neatly kept lawns. It was a quiet, ordinary morning, much like any other, until the call came. Inside, Marie Henderson, a nurse at the local clinic, was preparing breakfast, and her husband, Thomas, a high school history teacher, was getting ready for work. Their daughter, Olivia, was still in her room, as she often was, a well-behaved teenager who had never caused them trouble. But on that morning, everything would change. As the phone rang, Marie answered it without thinking, her hand shaking slightly as she picked up the receiver. On the other end of the line, a cold, monotone voice spoke words that would haunt her for the rest of her life. There has been a series of violent murders in Willow Creek. Your daughter, Olivia Henderson, is connected to these killings. Marie's heart stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. It was incomprehensible. Olivia, their sweet, quiet girl, at the center of a brutal killing spree? The news felt like a nightmare, a twisted fantasy that couldn't possibly be true. But it was. And this is where our story truly begins. Before the brutal killings, before the police investigations, before the trial that would captivate the nation, there was a seemingly ordinary family in an idyllic town. Marie and Thomas had raised their daughter in what they believed was a safe, loving environment. How could this have happened? How had their daughter gone from being the girl next door to a cold-blooded murderer? To understand the answer, we have to go back, many years earlier, to a time when Olivia was just a child, growing up in Willow Creek. A town where neighbors were like family, and crime was a rarity, where the most frightening thing anyone faced was a broken window or a stolen bicycle. But even here, in the quietest of places, darkness can find its way in. Olivia Henderson was born on a crisp fall morning in October of 1997, the only child of Marie and Thomas. From the moment she was brought into the world, it was clear that she was going to be a special child. She was bright, polite, and always eager to please. She would sit quietly with her books, play with her dolls for hours, and never cause trouble. A dream child, it seemed. Her parents often marveled at how easy it was to raise her, so much so that they felt truly blessed. Marie would often tell her friends, "Olivia's just naturally well-behaved. She never gives us trouble. I couldn't ask for a better child." As she grew, Olivia excelled in school. She was a top student, always at the top of her class. Her teachers described her as thoughtful and introspective. She rarely spoke out of turn, preferring to observe rather than participate in the social drama that often consumed the other children. Her teachers found her quiet, but sweet. She was liked by all her peers, though few truly knew her beyond her calm, reserved exterior. By the time she was in middle school, Olivia was well on her way to becoming the model teenager. At home, she was respectful and obedient. But what her parents didn't know, and what no one in Willow Creek could have imagined, was that beneath the surface of this perfect child, something darker was beginning to stir. By high school, small cracks started to show in Olivia's demeanor. It began with subtle changes that her parents didn't know how to interpret. She became more withdrawn, spending long hours in her room, listening to music or drawing in her sketchbook. But nothing that stood out. At first, Marie and Thomas dismissed it as a normal phase, a teenager asserting her independence. But then came the artwork. Olivia had always been a quiet child, and her passion for art had always been one of her more admirable qualities. But something began to change in her drawings. They became darker, more disturbing. What had once been pictures of serene landscapes and playful animals now began to feature twisted images of violence. A knife plunged into a person's chest, a bloodied body in a desolate room. Her teachers, who had long praised her talent, now began to feel uneasy. "I never thought much of it at first," says Mrs. Green, Olivia's art teacher, in an interview. "All teenagers go through phases, right? But when I started to see the images she was creating, there was something unsettling about it. It wasn't like the typical rebellion or teenage angst. It felt calculated, almost too cold. Her classmates also noticed the change. Olivia, once a part of the social fabric of the school, began to isolate herself more and more. She didn't seem to care about friendships anymore. Her former best friend, Emma, recalls the shift that happened by the time Olivia entered her junior year. It was like she wasn't really there anymore. She'd just stare at you, like she was studying you, waiting for something. But she never said anything. It was creepy. But even with these signs, Olivia's parents chose to ignore the red flags. Marie, ever the optimist, chalked it up to the pressures of high school. "She's a good kid," she'd tell anyone who asked. "She's just going through a phase, that's all." What they failed to see, however, was that Olivia had been hiding a darkness that had been festering inside her for years. A darkness that was now beginning to consume her. It was the summer after Olivia's high school graduation that the first body was discovered in the outskirts of Willow Creek. The victim was a transient named Michael Gray, a drifter who had passed through the town a few times before. He was found in the woods just outside of town, his throat slit, a savage and violent murder that shocked the quiet community to its core. Willow Creek, a town with little to no crime, was suddenly gripped by fear. The police had no leads, and the town, still reeling from the shock, dismissed the murder as the work of an outsider. Someone passing through who had left just as mysteriously as they arrived. But this wasn't an isolated incident. As the days passed, more bodies began to turn up. Each murder was different. A random elderly woman found strangled in her home. A young man's lifeless body discovered by the riverbank. A mother of two brutally stabbed to death outside a grocery store. It seemed like an unending nightmare, with no clear pattern connecting the victims. The town, once idyllic and peaceful, now locked its doors at night and cast wary glances at anyone unfamiliar. Though the killings were horrific, there was one key detail. No one suspected Olivia. She had just started college at a nearby university and was living at home with her parents. To the outside world, she appeared to be the same quiet, well-behaved girl she had always been. She attended classes, spent long hours at the library, and continued to keep to herself. But beneath the surface, something darker was at play. Olivia's parents had no reason to believe that their daughter was anything but the shy, studious young woman they had raised. They never imagined that the seemingly innocent girl they had watched grow up was capable of such violence. But investigators, as they later discovered, were uncovering a very different story. Olivia was living a double life. To the people around her, she was a college student, someone focused on her future. But behind closed doors, Olivia was a cold, calculating killer. With each murder, she grew bolder, more confident in her ability to elude the authorities. The fear that had swept through Willow Creek was about to become a chilling realization for her family. The truth about Olivia's actions would finally come to light on an otherwise ordinary day in November. Thomas and Marie, as they often did, had gone into her room to clean. It was a quiet Saturday morning, and they thought nothing of it as they dusted the shelves and rearranged her belongings. But while Thomas was tidying up beneath Olivia's bed, he made a discovery that would change everything. Hidden underneath her mattress was a small black leather journal. Thomas, curious but unaware of the horror it contained, opened the book. The pages were filled with detailed descriptions of the murders. Each entry was a meticulous account of the killings, from the stalking of the victims to the brutal acts themselves. The most chilling part, however, was Olivia's own words describing how she felt. Exhilarated, invincible, detached. It was as if the murders were a form of art, a game. Not real lives being lost, but pieces in a puzzle she had been piecing together in secret. At first, Thomas thought he was reading someone else's writing. It couldn't be Olivia, their daughter, who had always been so docile, so obedient. He must have been mistaken. But as he continued to read, he saw the details, the names, the locations, the precise nature of the killings. It was unmistakably her. "Marie!" Thomas shouted, his voice shaking with disbelief. "You need to see this." When Marie came into the room and saw the journal, she was frozen in place. There were no words, only the suffocating realization that their daughter, their Olivia, had been living a dark and twisted life right under their noses. The quiet, compliant child they had raised had become a monster. For the next few days, Marie and Thomas were paralyzed with indecision. What should they do? How could they possibly turn in their own daughter? The pain of the discovery was suffocating. Their world had shattered in an instant, and they had no idea how to pick up the pieces. But as the murders continued and the town's fear mounted, the weight of the truth became too heavy to ignore. They could no longer live in denial. The phone call they had received months earlier, the one that had felt like a nightmare, was beginning to make too much sense. The realization hit them with brutal force. Their daughter was a killer. One night, unable to bear the silence any longer, Thomas made the phone call that would change their lives forever. With trembling hands, he dialed the police. "I need to report a crime," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My daughter is the one responsible for the murders." When the police arrived, Olivia did not resist. She didn't cry. She didn't beg for mercy. She simply stared at her parents with eyes that had once shown love and innocence, but now were cold and empty. There was no recognition in those eyes, only a chilling emptiness. During her interrogation, Olivia's behavior was equally unnerving. She spoke with the same detached calmness that she had exhibited throughout the investigation. There was no remorse in her voice, no hint of regret. She described the killings as if she were recounting a simple errand, matter-of-factly, without emotion. "I didn't feel anything when I did it," Olivia told the detectives, her voice eerily composed. "It was just something I had to do. I felt like I had control over them, over everything." Detective Linda Harris, the lead investigator on the case, was struck by Olivia's lack of empathy. Most people feel something. Even the most cold-hearted criminals usually have some form of emotion, whether it's anger, guilt, or fear, she said. But with Olivia, there was nothing. She was completely empty. Olivia's confession was chilling, but it also confirmed the suspicions that had been slowly growing within the investigators. Olivia had been fantasizing about killing from a very young age. The murders were not spontaneous acts of violence, but carefully calculated steps in a twisted plan she had been building for years. For Marie and Thomas, the truth was too much to bear. Their daughter, the girl they had raised, the girl they thought they knew, had become a cold-blooded killer. And as much as they wanted to believe otherwise, the evidence was undeniable. The trial of Olivia Brooks was a spectacle that captivated the entire nation. The small town of Willow Creek, once known for its peace and tight-knit community, became infamous as the hometown of a mass murderer. Reporters and journalists descended upon the town, eager to cover the story of a seemingly perfect young woman who had turned into a ruthless killer. The courtroom was packed every day. Locals, strangers, and even those who had no connection to the case, all drawn in by the shocking turn of events. For Thomas and Marie, it was the hardest ordeal of their lives. They had been advised by their attorney not to speak to the media, but their silence only fueled the growing media frenzy. How could two loving parents raise a child capable of such violence? What had gone wrong? The press was relentless. Headlines splashed across newspapers. "The girl next door, a killer in our midst." Olivia Brooks, a perfect child turned monster. Every outlet speculated about the upbringing that might have led Olivia down this dark path. But for Thomas and Marie, it wasn't just about answering the questions from reporters. It was about facing the undeniable truth that their daughter, the child they had loved and nurtured, was capable of taking lives without a second thought. Inside the courtroom, the defense mounted its case. Olivia's lawyers argued that she had suffered from undiagnosed mental health issues, specifically antisocial personality disorder. They brought in expert witnesses who testified that Olivia's violent fantasies, her lack of empathy, and her chilling detachment could be signs of a deeper psychological condition. A condition that might have been there from childhood, a product of nature rather than nurture. Olivia Brooks didn't just wake up one day and decide to kill, her defense attorney argued. She is a victim of her own brain chemistry, of a mind that was never properly wired to feel the way others do. She should be treated, not punished. But the prosecution had a different story. Armed with Olivia's chilling confessions, her journal entries, and the forensic evidence, they painted a portrait of a cold, calculating killer who knew exactly what she was doing. Olivia had never shown any remorse for her actions. During her interrogation, she had even seemed curious about the process of the investigation, as if she were more fascinated by the game of it all than concerned about the lives she had taken. She didn't just kill these people, the prosecutor said, his voice rising. She took pleasure in it. She planned it. She stalked them. She murdered them in cold blood. This wasn't a case of someone who didn't know right from wrong. This was someone who knew exactly what she was doing. And she did it without remorse. As the trial continued, the evidence mounted. Olivia's journal, her detailed accounts of the murders, her confessions, and the testimonies of those who had known her, all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. Olivia Brooks was a killer. But what was most terrifying of all was the complete lack of emotion she showed throughout the entire process. Olivia sat in the courtroom every day, her face a mask of detachment. She showed no fear, no sorrow, not even a flicker of emotion when her parents were called to testify. In fact, the only time her demeanor changed was when she was asked about her victims. When asked why she had killed them, she simply replied, "Because I had to." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. The evidence was overwhelming, and Olivia's lack of remorse had sealed her fate. She was found guilty on all counts. As the judge read the verdict, Olivia remained expressionless, as though it didn't matter to her in the slightest. There was no sense of relief, no acknowledgement of guilt. She had been convicted of multiple murders, and yet she stood there as if the outcome was irrelevant. The parents who had once seen their daughter as a shy, obedient girl could only watch as she was led away in handcuffs, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. "Olivia Brooks," the judge announced, "you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The trial may have ended, but for Thomas and Marie, the nightmare was far from over. The consequences of Olivia's crimes were felt not only in the courtroom, but throughout the entire town of Willow Creek. Local residents, many of whom had known Olivia her entire life, struggled to reconcile the sweet, quiet girl they had once known with the heartless killer she had become. Some of Olivia's former friends couldn't understand how the girl they had grown up with could have harbored such darkness. "She was always so shy, so nice," one of her childhood friends, Sarah, told the media. "I never thought she was capable of something like this. It's like we never really knew her at all." The shockwaves of Olivia's actions spread through the town. Parents became more protective of their own children, afraid that they too might be hiding a darkness beneath the surface. Teachers and counselors in Willow Creek began holding seminars on recognizing the signs of violent tendencies in children. The town, which had once been a model of peace, was now a place where fear lingered in every corner. For Thomas and Marie, the pain was almost unbearable. They were no longer the parents of the sweet girl who had grown up in their home. They were the parents of a convicted murderer. The whispers from neighbors, the looks of pity from friends. It all became too much to bear. They were forced to leave Willow Creek. The place that had once been their sanctuary was now a prison of memories. Memories of a daughter they could no longer recognize. They moved to a small town far away, hoping to find peace, hoping to escape the constant reminders of what had happened. But there was no escaping the truth. Olivia was still their daughter, and the weight of that truth hung over them every day. In the years that followed, Olivia remained in prison, and her behavior continued to puzzle the staff. Though she rarely engaged in physical altercations, she had developed a reputation for her psychological manipulation. Inmates feared her not for her strength, but for her cunning. Olivia had a way of sowing discord among the prisoners, using her intelligence to turn people against each other. "She doesn't care about anyone, and that makes her dangerous," one of the correctional officers said. "She's smart, and she knows how to use people to her advantage. She doesn't get involved in fights, but she knows how to play the game." Psychologists who met with Olivia found her unnerving. When asked about her past crimes, Olivia showed no remorse. In fact, she seemed almost detached from her own actions. "I did what I had to do," she would say, her voice devoid of emotion. "They were in my way." For Thomas and Marie, the visits to Olivia were brief and painful. The girl they had raised, the girl who had once filled their home with laughter and love, was gone. In her place was a woman who barely acknowledged their presence. Her eyes cold and distant, her demeanor unchanging. "I don't know her anymore," Marie said quietly during one of the interviews. "The girl I raised is gone, and I don't know who that person is in that prison." The psychological toll on the Brooks family was devastating. Despite counseling and therapy, they couldn't escape the nightmare of what their daughter had done. The guilt of having raised a killer, the pain of losing their daughter not to death but to something far worse lingered for years. In the years following Olivia's conviction, the town of Willow Creek slowly began to rebuild itself, but the shadows of the past never fully receded. The once vibrant community, which had prided itself on its sense of safety and unity, was forever marked by the tragic events that had unfolded within its borders. The whispers and stares, the hushed conversations in grocery store aisles, and the uncomfortable silences at town meetings all served as constant reminders of the darkness that had infiltrated their peaceful lives. The community had always been close-knit, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. But after the murders, things changed. Parents, once comfortable letting their children roam the streets after school, became more protective, questioning their kids' friends, their online activity, their every move. Teachers and counselors who had known Olivia as a child began offering extra resources for parents and students, fearing that they too might be harboring similar tendencies. No one could ever be sure again. The fear that anyone in town could be hiding a darkness as deep as Olivia's became an inescapable reality. The local police department, which had once been able to handle minor incidents with ease, now faced heightened scrutiny from the public. Residents wanted to know what signs had been missed, what could have been done to prevent the tragedy. Could the murders have been stopped if the town had been more vigilant? If someone had noticed the changes in Olivia earlier, perhaps the death toll could have been lower. But for many, this was the hardest question to answer. Was it even possible to stop her once the darkness had taken hold? For Thomas and Marie, the aftermath of Olivia's crimes was far more than just a legal battle. The true consequences of their daughter's actions went far deeper than the media coverage, the courtroom drama, and the whispers in town. It was the emotional weight of knowing that their child, the one they had raised and loved, was responsible for so much pain. No amount of therapy could erase the guilt. No amount of time could heal the hurt. Even after the trial, their lives never returned to normal. They had relocated to a new town, hoping to escape the suffocating presence of the memories that still haunted them. But the damage had already been done. The trauma of Olivia's actions could not be outrun. Marie spent long hours poring over old photographs, wondering where she had gone wrong. Was there something in Olivia's childhood that they missed? The signs of a broken mind, the early detachment, the violence she dismissed as teenage rebellion? She had been so hopeful that Olivia would grow out of it, that the girl she raised would emerge from the difficult phase and become the woman she had always imagined. Instead, Olivia had become something far darker, and Marie felt she had failed her daughter, failed to see the truth before it was too late. Thomas, ever the pragmatist, tried to focus on the psychological explanations. He met with experts who suggested that Olivia's psychopathy was likely a combination of genetics and environmental factors. But no amount of psychological insight could answer the question that haunted him most. Could I have done something to stop this? It's not about blaming yourself, one psychologist had told him during a session. It's about understanding that some things are beyond our control. Sometimes, people are born this way. Sometimes there's nothing you can do. But that wasn't enough for Thomas. He wanted answers, wanted to know what had caused Olivia's transformation. He wanted to know how a little girl who had once adored her parents, who had been so quiet, so obedient, could become a remorseless killer. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself," Thomas confessed during an interview. "She was our daughter, and I don't understand what happened. Maybe we could have done more. Maybe we missed something. But I can't help feeling like we failed her, and worse, we failed the people she hurt. Life in prison had done little to change Olivia. She remained emotionally distant, as cold and unyielding as she had been during her trial. The woman who had once seemed so ordinary, the quiet girl who sat in class, the young woman who once dreamed of college and a future, was now just another inmate, but one who terrified those around her with her lack of emotion and her unnerving composure. Over the years, prison psychologists had tried to engage with Olivia, attempting to understand the mind of someone who had committed such heinous acts without a shred of remorse. Her responses were always chilling in their simplicity. When asked why she had killed, she replied matter-of-factly, "I had to. It was the only way to feel something." Her ability to detach herself from the violence she had inflicted on her victims left the prison staff in disbelief. Olivia had shown no signs of remorse, no desire to understand the magnitude of her actions. Instead, she spoke of the murders with the same indifference one might use when discussing the weather. "I did it because I needed to," Olivia told one psychologist during a session. "It was like a release. You wouldn't understand. I couldn't stop myself." Her prison reputation grew over time. Inmates feared her not for her physical strength, but for her cunning mind. She wasn't the kind to engage in physical altercations. Rather, Olivia used psychological manipulation to exert control over those around her. She had a way of sowing discord, playing people against each other without lifting a finger. Her intelligence, her ability to read people and manipulate them, made her a figure to be feared. Correctional officers who worked closely with Olivia found her unnervingly composed. "I've worked with violent offenders for years," one guard said, "but I've never met anyone like her. Most of these guys show some kind of emotion, even if it's anger or regret. Olivia, she just doesn't care." Despite her calculated behavior, Olivia remained isolated within the prison. She rarely interacted with other inmates and spent most of her time reading or writing. Prison psychologists noted that she exhibited an unsettling calm, as though she had already accepted her fate. Despite the answers that were provided by experts and the legal verdict that sentenced Olivia to life in prison, there were still lingering questions that no one could answer. Was Olivia's descent into violence something that was always inevitable? Or was there something in her upbringing, something that her parents missed, that had triggered this dark transformation? Could anything have been done to stop her? Or was Olivia simply destined to follow this path regardless of her environment? Psychologists had debated for years about the influence of genetics and upbringing on violent behavior. Was Olivia's lack of empathy and emotional detachment the result of a genetic predisposition? Or had her family life somehow shaped her into the monster she became? Experts in criminal psychology noted that Olivia exhibited many of the hallmarks of psychopathy: a total absence of remorse, a desire for control, and an unsettling calm in the face of destruction. But was she born this way? Or was it something that developed over time, nurtured by her experiences, her family dynamics, or the pressures of growing up in a seemingly perfect but ultimately stifling environment? In the end, there would be no easy answers. The question of why would continue to haunt everyone involved: the victims' families, the investigators, and the people of Willow Creek. As for Thomas and Marie, their journey was one of ongoing grief. Olivia was no longer the little girl they had raised, but she would always be their daughter. And for them, that was both a blessing and a curse. The story of Olivia Brooks is a tragic one. A story that raises more questions than answers. A story that lingers in the minds of those who lived through it. For Willow Creek, it is a chapter in their history that they will never forget. The town will always remember the girl who seemed so perfect, so innocent, and yet who hid a monstrous darkness beneath the surface. For Thomas and Marie, their lives will never be the same. They have lived through the unimaginable, the loss of their daughter to a fate worse than death. They will carry the weight of Olivia's crimes for the rest of their lives, wondering if there was something they could have done differently, if there was something they missed, or if this was the inevitable outcome of a broken mind. Olivia Brooks will remain in prison for the rest of her life, her future a cold and lonely one. The questions of nature versus nurture will continue to be debated, but the truth is, some people are simply beyond understanding. In the end, Olivia's story serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most frightening monsters are those who hide in plain sight, and that the darkness can grow even in the most unexpected of places. Years passed, but the pain from Olivia's crimes never truly healed. Her name, once associated with innocence and promise, had become synonymous with horror. For those who had known her best, her parents, her former friends, and the people of Willow Creek, the damage was permanent. The sense of betrayal, of disbelief that someone so familiar could turn into such a cold-blooded killer, lingered like an open wound that could never fully close. Olivia had once been the girl everyone thought they understood. She was quiet, well-behaved, and outwardly seemed to live a perfect life. But no one had seen the darkness creeping beneath the surface. It was a terrifying reminder that sometimes the most violent criminals aren't the ones who stand out in the crowd. They're the ones who blend in, who look just like everyone else. Her parents, Thomas and Marie, did their best to move on, but life would never be the same. They had hoped that time might dull the edge of their grief, but it only deepened it. The more they tried to rebuild, the more the weight of what had happened and what they had missed seemed to crush them. For Thomas, the memories of Olivia's childhood remained a cruel reminder of what they had lost. He couldn't shake the image of his daughter, the little girl he had raised with such care, the one he had taught to ride a bike and held in his arms when she was sick, transforming into the monster who had caused such devastation. He spent countless hours in therapy, trying to understand the psychology behind Olivia's actions, but each answer seemed to bring more pain, more confusion. "She was always so good," Thomas had said in a rare interview. "I thought she was just shy, maybe distant at times, but never violent. She never gave us any reason to think that something was wrong. How could we have known?" Marie's experience was no less painful, but it was different. Where Thomas sought answers, Marie struggled with guilt. Could she have seen the signs earlier? Could she have been more vigilant when Olivia's behavior began to change? As a mother, Marie wrestled with the idea that she might have missed something crucial in her daughter's upbringing. The question kept her awake at night. Could I have saved her? Marie had always been the nurturing one, the person who kept the family grounded, but the weight of Olivia's actions had fractured her sense of self. The woman she had been before the murders seemed like a different person entirely. She often found herself retreating into memories of a time when Olivia had been just a little girl, running around the yard and laughing. But those memories were slowly fading, replaced by a grim reality that could never be undone. "You don't realize how much you love someone until they're gone," Marie confided to a close friend. "But I feel like I lost her twice. Once when she changed, and again when she went to prison. I don't even know who she is anymore." They both visited Olivia in prison, but each visit left them more shattered than before. Olivia was unrecognizable to them, not just physically, but emotionally. The girl they had raised had evaporated, replaced by someone who felt nothing, who expressed no remorse for her actions. Each visit left them questioning whether this cold, emotionless woman in front of them was even their daughter anymore. The psychological impact of Olivia's case continued to ripple through the community and the criminal justice system. For psychologists and criminologists, Olivia became a textbook example of a person with an utter lack of empathy, a textbook case of psychopathy. Her ability to commit horrific crimes without a second thought was chilling, and experts still debated what could have been done to intervene. Dr. Evelyn Turner, a leading psychologist specializing in criminal behavior, weighed in on Olivia's case in a public interview. Olivia's case was unusual, she said. She exhibited many of the hallmark traits of psychopathy, an absence of remorse, a cold detachment from others' pain. But what's particularly disturbing is how she maintained this facade of normalcy for so long. She had the ability to blend in, to convince those around her that she was just another quiet, well-behaved girl. Dr. Turner went on to explain that Olivia's behavior was likely a combination of nature and nurture. Some children are born with a predisposition to violent behavior. Genetics can play a significant role, but that doesn't mean environment is irrelevant. In Olivia's case, her family life appeared stable, and there were no obvious indicators that would have led anyone to believe she was capable of such acts. Sometimes, the signs are subtle: the social withdrawal, the fascination with violence, the lack of empathy. But they can go unnoticed, especially in a child who is otherwise obedient. As more information about Olivia's upbringing and psychological profile emerged, the criminal justice system began to question whether more could have been done to intervene earlier. Some questioned the role of the education system. Had Olivia's teachers missed the subtle signs of her growing detachment? Had they noticed her increasingly violent artwork or her isolation and done nothing about it? There were no easy answers, and the more experts delved into Olivia's background, the more they realized that this was a case that defied simple explanations. It wasn't just about neglect or trauma, and it wasn't just about being born bad. It was the terrifying intersection of genetic predisposition, a fractured psyche, and a community that didn't see the storm brewing until it was too late. The story of Olivia's crimes also led to a shift in how the community understood evil. In a town that had once felt safe, even idyllic, the events that had unfolded felt like a harsh awakening. Willow Creek was no longer just another small town with quaint houses and friendly neighbors. It had become the home of a monster who had once been one of their own. As more details emerged about Olivia's early life, many in the town struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet, sweet girl they had once known with the cold, remorseless killer she had become. Teachers, family friends, and former classmates all tried to make sense of it. Could they have done something? Could they have seen the warning signs? "I never thought she was capable of something like this," said one of Olivia's childhood friends. "She was always quiet, but I thought she was just shy. I never thought she could be like that." But there were those who argued that people should have seen it coming. They pointed to the unsettling artwork Olivia had produced in high school, the eerie detachment she had exhibited toward others, the way she had slowly drifted away from friends. Looking back, it seemed almost inevitable. But hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. As Olivia's case gained national attention, a deeper philosophical question began to take root. Was Olivia born evil, or was she shaped by her environment? This question wasn't just academic, it was personal. For her parents, Thomas and Marie, it was the question that gnawed at them every day. They had spent years trying to piece together the puzzle of their daughter's descent into darkness, but they never found a satisfactory answer. The truth remained elusive, hidden in the recesses of Olivia's mind. Was it her upbringing, her genetics, or was she simply born that way? Could a different path have been taken? Could she have been saved? In the end, no one knew. And perhaps that was the most haunting part of the story, that some questions can never be answered, some mysteries can never be solved. The story of Olivia Brooks, the quiet girl who became a killer, is a chilling reminder of the unpredictability of human nature. It raises difficult questions about nature versus nurture, about the forces that shape a person's destiny, and about the extent to which anyone can ever truly know another person. For Thomas and Marie, and for everyone in Willow Creek, the scars of Olivia's actions will never fully heal. Their lives will always be marked by the knowledge that they once loved a monster who was their daughter. And for Olivia, behind bars, her journey is far from over. The questions surrounding her transformation into a killer will continue to haunt both the people she left behind and the experts who study her case. But in the end, perhaps the most chilling truth of all is that some monsters are born, not made. And sometimes, the true nature of a person can remain hidden until it's far too late.